All right, hello everyone. Here we are back for another Golf Clash tutorial, and this is hole 7 of the Eagle Peak from the third tee box we're going to discuss here, which is going to be this tee box. And what usually ends up happening is you have a line here that's kind of right around here for your min line, max line. Might just be a little bit lower than that, but it's pretty close to that tree line. I was trying to get it kind of right towards the bottom of that fairway. It's very, very close to kind of where I put with a power 3 ball. So what typically ends up happening is you need two different shots, and there's kind of priorities as to how you'll want to play it. What I'll typically do, what I would recommend for a, let's take a look here. For a side to headwind, for instance, I'm probably going to have a driver case. So let's take a look at kind of priority as to what I want here. So I'm thinking, Thor's hammer 6 or 7 is going to be ideal. Next, we're probably going to put a POC 6 or 7 kind of right below here. We're pretty much not going to break it up in terms of accuracy, and we'll just kind of treat them equal because it's pretty much going to dictate the shot we need to hit. Aside from this, we won't really have an option here other than a QB, but I'm assuming you won't be able to roll through this tour with QB. But QB 10 would be kind of your best, or QB 8 or whatever the level is that it hits max backspin. And I know it's down there somewhere. It's kind of a higher level, maybe an 8. It would kind of shift up here to the kind of the highest choice. Ideally, however, you're probably not rolling with it in this tour because it would be very, very tough from the third tee deck to navigate with QB in tour play. But with the new bag swaps, if you're allowed to, this is something that you need to start considering, because if they do, in fact, instate to where you can bag swap on the tee deck, if it looks like you can get through with a QB, switching to a QB, or, and you probably won't want to use rock because you won't have enough backspin. So switching to QB, which would actually be kind of a strategic move. They won't let you do it on the shootout, but if it looks like you can get to the shootout, and you're probably not going to win the hole outright anyway, you might want to play the hole with the QB just in case the shootout pops up. Because with these par 3s, QB is going to kind of be your top priority. The only thing that would be kind of comparable would be a Thor 7. So with that in mind, if you don't have Thor 7 and you think you can get to the shootout, might be beneficial after you see the hole to just go with the QB 10 and, hope that you can hole out on the original hole. But if you don't, you're well prepared for the shootout. So let's talk about the shot here, which is landing right on the very, very bottom tip of this fairway, right at the min club line here. And it's going to be max backspin. We're just kind of scoot this up this hill here. The only times that we're really going to be able to do this shot here is for side and headwinds. So we're going to have to use max. And when I say max, that means 6.5. So if you have 6.5, which all of these clubs do, except for Thor 6 and 7. But we can still use max, for instance, with the Thor shot. So let me just kind of show you the Thor shot. But I would probably lean towards you maybe going 7 bars and kind of maybe idolizing this spot. Because what can happen with you doing the Thor shot with max is you might actually rocket down this hill a little bit too fast. So what I would kind of recommend is maybe somewhere right around here with the Thor, and then just maybe crank this up to, 7.5, 8, somewhere in that effect. So let's just say somewhere in between 7 and 8 for this Thor's hammer case. And that's just to get a little bit more control on the hill. is the reason that I'm mentioning that. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to play it a lot less aggressive towards this front min club, which makes the adjustment a little bit easier to do and a little bit safer to do as well. Now, in addition to this, you're going to want to put as much side spin towards the right as you can, and you'll have to scale your curl. There's times with this shot that I have to go max curl. There's times that I have to go no curl. So what you'll have to do is you'll just have to be somewhere in between this range, of 0 curl and somewhere in the range of max curl. And it's just going to have to be gradient on that scale depending on wind and wind effect. So the way that you're going to execute this shot and beat your opponent more times than not is you'll outplay them in terms of wind effect. So the person that plays the wind effect the best typically is the one that wins the shootout. So these are pretty much, the shots that we'll be talking about in terms of these cases. And these are pretty much be the only times that you're able to do that. But when we get the tailwind case, we can actually still replicate this line. So let's talk about this. These are all backspin values, for instance. But let me pull up because there's an alternate approach. So I'm going to kind of, maybe just, this is either yellow color line or it's going to be orange as well. And the orange case is going to be a wood. So in terms of the woods down here that I'll just kind of write in cases for, let's take a look at what woods are going to be best and pretty much the ones with the best range. So Guardian 8 is going to kind of stay towards the top because it's so accurate. So Guardian 8 will be a very good one. Alternatively, your next best bet is pretty much, I would say, Hammerhead 6. You start to get a little bit less range, but it'll still, cover you for most cases. Alternatively, you can get away with this shot for a couple sniper shots. So I will throw this in here, but it's really going to need to be a Sniper 10 if you want to really be able to bring this shot into play, because this gap separation is just going to be a lot to overcome. And then lastly, and you still have to factor this in because you could still lose to, Cat 5, Cat 6, somewhere in there, Cat 7, but it's going to be a lower priority club than all of these. However, you still need to, there's plenty of Cat 6 and 7 shots that I can easily win with. So that's just what the minimum is required for you to actually play this shot because it needs that amount of backspin. So what I'll typically do on this land zone is I'll still pretty much use max in this case. So I said I'd do orange for this case. That's all these cases above here for the wood case for this same line here. And as I mentioned, very, very close to max. And it's just going to basically be these tailwind cases for this shot. So I'll only do this for tailwinds to where I'll land it here. And I'll pretty much never play this fairway. But there will be a couple situations where I might have to. What if I have a berserker and I need to play down here? That'll be kind of the only isolated case that I'll bring this. And as you can see, as long as I have these drivers, I'll never have to play this case. So let's just say hypothetically you do have an extra mile, a POC 4 for whatever reason. I would not suggest it because I think you can get through this tour easier with Thor 4 than you can a POC 4. So, but I will write this case in just to kind of help you figure that out. Because this shot is viable. It can happen. It's just a little bit harder to control. This one is, much more easy. If this guy executes, it's going to be very, very challenging to beat him. However, you can still get the ace from there. So kind of two ways to look at that. But from a percentage standpoint, this guy's going to win more times than this guy's going to win. And we're not even going to talk about right. There's no reason to ever play right. Pretty much, aside from 2 mile per hour winds. So I did talk about it on the T-Box 1 case, but not even worth mentioning for second and third. I would never take this route because it's just going to come down the hill too much fast. And as I mentioned, anybody who went over here, I didn't lose this hole very much, especially an expert. From the second tee box, I might have lost this once, like all weekend. So, very easy to master going towards this left-hand side. It's really, kind of a kill shot here. So let's talk about this because the adjustments are going to kind of need different. So the wood case here, let's take a look. So, let's say we have a side wind and we hit this driver case, which is this case down here, this yellow case, and that's why I'm doing it. So with the side wind, I'll pretty much use my max number, even though I'm at min club. It's very, very close to max. Not going to really change from max. There's a slight chance that I might maybe use the mid number, but it would be a very, very isolated case. And the wind would have to be kind of maybe ducking around these trees, for instance. But what I'll usually end up doing, even if I have to pull this way into the trees, I usually typically end up max curling. And regardless if I land here or 1 yard over, essentially I can get it to curl over hard enough and just kind of underplay the wind anyway. So, max to mid, somewhere in this range. And for the tailwind case, that's going to be pretty much a wood case. So, the adjustment's going to be a little bit different. I'll usually do max plus 20. But there'll be times, if it gets really, really, really large, that I can maybe go max plus 30. So somewhere in between 20 to 30, depending on how strong it gets. The stronger it gets, and you're pretty much just max your backspin and then just try to control the landing zone is essentially the way that you want to. And, estimate how much you're going to need to curl. Is it a right, left wind? You'll just have to kind of scale your curl depending on what you see, because the ball guide is always going to kind of look like this over towards the left-hand side of the hole. So you're always going to need some kind of curl in terms of what it looks like on the ball guide. However, some winds are going to be pointed right hard enough that you won't need to apply any curl. So these are the types of things that you need to be thinking about when playing your shot. So let's talk about the headwind case, because there's kind of two different cases here as to how we're going to play this. So what I'll typically do here is about max plus 10. And keep in mind this is a driver case. So, it's in no relation to this tailwind. It's more like this side wind, but since it's a headwind, you're going to have to adjust more because it's going to have trouble getting up to that spot. So usually around max plus 10. If it gets, a very large wind straight in the face, you could potentially go as much as, I'd say, plus 25. So somewhere between 10 and 25, and you'll just have to scale accordingly. If the wind gets up towards 15 miles per hour, then you're going to want to do this 25 case. If it's down around 9 and it's kind of angled, kind of like we saw in the tournament case, maybe I'll do max plus 10. So you'll pretty much fall somewhere between that scale as to what you'll need for your ring adjustment. And, pretty much for the most part, right around the max, and you can just kind of change your landing zone. If it gets really nasty, I wouldn't play around with the backspin, cheating it too much. You could maybe take off half a bar. But I would, just kind of try to tweak this landing zone a little bit more and keep that backspin up is what I recommend. So instead of landing here, if the wind gets really high, I can just land, half a ring up or a ring extra, as opposed to taking off backspin. So do keep that in mind. That pretty much covers this hole as to what you're going to need to do. But aside from that, let's talk about this last case just in case. And what I'll typically do here is I'll play very close to max down here for my wood. So this will be a wood case. It sets up pretty close to mid club, but it's going to shoot downhill and it's going to play very close to max. So I'll usually play pretty close to max on this adjustment. And what the shot should look like is it'll kind of land up like this and just kind of roll this hill. And usually, no matter how much right spin you have, your ball guide will still be towards the left of the hole, so you'll need a little bit of curl. And what I'll typically do, this is actually kind of a top spin case. What I'll typically do, maybe for a side wind, is somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 1. So 1 side spin. The tailwind case, what is nice about this is you can do it in all winds, and you can just kind of tweak this spin a little bit. Towards a headwind, it's going to kind of change your ring adjustment. Might make things a little bit harder, but as I mentioned, with the side wind, we're going to pretty much go max with this. With the tailwind, relatively close to max. I might do max plus 10 with the tailwind because it'll tend to overshoot just a little bit. So pretty much somewhere in this range. There will be few set exceptions where it might even overshoot beyond max plus 10 in this tailwind case. That you might have to, but that wind will have to get cranking up there, snow globe type wind, which is actually going to bring in another problem, which is hard for you, which is min wood's going to start to come in. So hopefully, you don't have that scenario, and because ideally you'd like to land up here. Here's the problem: is if that wind gets massive enough, you're going to need a guardian to stop it if you go for this shot. So that's the one instance where you'll actually need to play this shot, because if you go for here, you're going to land up here and you're not going to be able to keep it down on this hill with only 6.5 bars of backspin if you get a massive tailwind. So that is part of the problem. This is very isolated as to what you can do. And what I'm assuming is you'll probably always have a kingmaker on, and with a kingmaker on, you should always be able to go max and kind of land this spot and still stop it on this hill. But it does require landing right towards the bottom here. But let's talk about this, because it usually does require some curl, just like this shot does. It's almost about the same amount of curl. So the same amount of curl you see me do on this, and if you guys need to watch this shot, you can watch my Masters video. I did this, quite a few times. You might even be able to find this shootout a couple times as well that I did in some of my other whole videos. So you can probably find, a couple cases to where you can actually see either this shot or this shot being hit. And, once you start to memorize kind of the way that you need to play the wind effect and all this stuff, you're going to start to get much better. And as I mentioned, with the spin wise, these tailwinds, I can pretty much play, maybe close to 0 top spin in terms of a really large headwind. But when we start to, no, this is top spin. So in terms of top spin, I'll probably need to go a little bit closer towards 2 in this case, sometimes maybe even 3. So somewhere between 2 and 3. This will be somewhere between 1.5 and 2 in most cases for this case, for those headwinds. And these are top spin values. So, aside from that, it'll just be kind of curling it around the tree. You'll want to land at least centered here. So when you start to curl, you don't run into this tree. And that's one of the biggest reasons that this shot's so important. And why I tried to, definitely go away from it is because that first hop can end up clipping the tree. So you do have to be careful with your curl, and you got to be very dialed in with how much curl you're using. So hopefully you're able to master this hole. Good luck with this shot. As I mentioned, very close to max here for these adjustments. With the headwind, we can start to go maybe max plus 10, max plus 20, somewhere in there for this ring adjustment for this spot. Somewhere, in the neighborhood of maybe a 20% overplay in the headwind case is what you'll need. So good luck with this hole, guys, and I'll see you guys on the next guide.